Have you ever felt the weight and expectations of a situation keep you from performing at your best or even paralyze you? It might have been a sports game, a date with someone you were really attracted to, or even an event at work like an important sales meeting. But in any high-pressure environment, sometimes it feels like some people just come to life, while others completely fold on themselves. Well, there are several tactics to overcome this pressure, and today we're going to be going in detail on the one tactic that I have used the most frequently to perform at my best in every competitive and high-stakes situation, as well as a story to help highlight it. I call it the Padawan Mindset. What? You can't blame me. Ahsoka drops in a couple of weeks. Like I mentioned, sometimes it feels like some people perform their absolute best when they're under pressure, and others go to complete pieces. Maybe you've noticed that in yourself. I know I have, and I bet most of us have experienced this at least at some level on both sides of the scale, just depending on the environment. Also, drop in the comments where you feel the most pressure to perform and the problems you face getting past it. Well, let's talk for a second about those different effects and how they play out. Obviously, we have those negative effects. I'm guessing that if you're watching this, you've experienced this to at least some degree, where you feel this sort of tension between a desired or expected outcome versus the fear of falling short of that. And I remember feeling this for the first time as a kid when I would be playing sports. In particular, as a young kid, playing pee-wee tackle football with all the pads and everything. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the game of football, but I always remember being nervous whenever I was on the offensive side of the ball. I could be playing wide receiver, running back, quarterback, didn't really matter, but in that environment, I always struggled with my nerves. But on the opposite side of the coin, whenever I played defense, I had no problems at all. I loved the challenge of getting into an opponent's backfield and just causing general mayhem. It was a lot of fun. It was a puzzle for me, and with some practice, I got halfway decent at solving it. And that carried over for me as an adult. Some areas of my life, I would be totally at ease, while in others, I would trip over the slightest disturbance from expectations. And for me, the area of sales and dating were particularly tough, especially at the beginning. So what is it that makes these nerves appear? In a word, it's attachment. The moment we want something or we have a goal, there becomes this state of tension between wanting that thing that we don't currently have and then the action required to go and get it. And sometimes it's out of our control. We're dependent on other people to help create that. And this sense of lack also creates a gap. And everything happens from here determines our reaction to that pressure. So what is the solution to these nerves? In my opinion, you have to obtain the right perspective. Pressure comes down to how we perceive ourselves and our ability to overcome any given challenge. I've met a lot of sales reps and people who avoid pressure altogether, either by working in a field where their income is dependent on them just showing up, or just having low standards to eliminate the need of performing at a high level. And part of me actually sympathizes with that because I've been tempted to do the same thing. I'm not going to pretend like I haven't. But high performers don't actually live in a state of default settings, right? They're not playing the cards that they've been dealt, but rather they're constantly trying to improve their situation and skills. Now, sometimes those are only micro improvements. Sometimes it's only trading in one card that makes the difference. And that's okay, because if you constantly reinvest on those improvements into improving your situation even further, you accelerate your rate of growth and you actually become an unstoppable force. So the key is how we do that without turning ourselves into a nervous wreck. Well, let me tell you a story. For 11 years, I worked in door-to-door sales. And I'll be honest, it is not for the timid or faint of heart. The doors can easily chew you up and spit you out if you're either distracted or unprepared. So to make things more enjoyable, one of the companies that I worked for would mix in competitions throughout our sales season to spice things up a bit. And one of them was called the Masters. Now, the Masters competition was a one-on-one competition where every rep in the company competed in a March Madness style elimination bracket. There would be a seeding round where everyone was determined which division and bracket they would be in. And then once you were in your bracket, you would be given a prize when you beat your opponent and progressed to the next round. Prizes started out pretty small, things like hats and shirts in the first rounds, but they could get pretty big if you were in one of the top divisions. And each week you would go head to head with another rep for 2 days. And the rep with the most serviced pest control accounts, that's what I sold at the time, of those 2 days would win. then you would get the prize and advance to the next round. And of course, the company would announce the prize list in advance. That way you could look out, find a prize that appealed to you, and you could start backtracking in how far you would have to go into the tournament to get this cool thing for free. Now, after all of the seeding rounds, I was placed in the second division. So I looked at all the prizes for the second division, and I realized pretty quickly that if I could win the Elite 8 round, I would actually get a PlayStation 4. Granted, this was 2016, so not all the cool tech of the PS5 and all that, but still, to me, being a poor, recent college grad, I was all about getting cool stuff for free. And each rep in the company was ranked, and the company standings were available to everyone, for everyone to see, as well as the entire bracket. And so I looked at the bracket and just went through the reps that I was most likely to face in the tournament as I scaled up the different rounds. And I realized that sitting in the exact spot of the Elite 8 matchup was a top 50 rep at the time of more than 1,000 reps in a company. There was a guy by the name of Damon, and I wasn't sure how he fell down to Division 2 when Division 1 held most of the top 250 reps, but there he was. Now, fortunately, it was early in the season, and while Damon was a more competent sales rep and was getting a lot more attention, the benefit that I had was I was aware of who he was, and he likely wasn't aware of me at all. And I also had a killer trainer whose name was Chandler, who had broken multiple company records of his own, and I figured he could help me game plan and raise my skill level to at least where I could compete with Damon. And so I remember going to Chandler and asking, hey, I want to be able to perform at this guy's level. What do I have to do to get there? And so Chandler and I strategized. We realized that I had quite a bit of work to do, to be honest. At the time, I was putting in like an average of 2 sales a day and needed to be able to do like 4 or 5 a day at will, just to have a shot at beating Damon. And so that became the standard. And throughout the rest of the season, I would meet with Chandler early in the morning outside of the normal training hours. And as a result, I started to improve. And sure enough, I actually ended up getting all the way to the Elite 8 of the Masters, and I'm facing Damon. And now at this point, I'm sure you can imagine the nerves. I've spent more than 8 weeks getting myself ready to be in a position to compete with this guy. Now, again, it's a 2-day competition, so starts on Thursday and all sales have to be finalized Friday night for them to count. And so we start off on day 1, and I am a hot mess. I was a complete ball of nerves. I mean, I wanted this so bad, but I was just tripping over myself, struggling with my pitch, trying to get customers to want to buy from me. But I actually only ended up closing 2 deals that day, and it was quite the letdown, to be honest. I was at least half off of where Chandler and I expected me to need to be at a minimum. The only real consoling fact is that Damon didn't really have a good day either. He had only pulled in 3 sales that day. And so at least I'm within striking distance. But as I'm sure you can guess, I was pretty frustrated, and I had spent so much time and effort trying to do this that I really felt like, regardless of everything that I had accomplished, that I was still falling short. I had actually put in so much work that my whole perspective on the competition changed, and I now wanted to beat Damon more than I actually wanted the prize. So as I was driving home, thinking ahead to the next day, I started feeling all of those old jitters from those old football days. And then something happened, and I want to outline in more detail that Padawan method from the beginning of the video before finishing the story. The Padawan method. Also, you can refer to this as being a student, right? Here's my thought process. Pressure comes from that attachment to an outcome. And that attachment is normally driven by your ego, by our ego. We all have it, right? Ego has 2 primary manifestations though. Number 1, the one that's the most popular, is that insatiable need to prove yourself or to prove that you're right. And then the second one, not quite as visible, but still just as lethal, is the imposter syndrome. Now, both of these are defeated by becoming that student or Padawan. And now the more visible side, right, that side of needing to prove yourself, is completely undermined when we take on this concept and this mindset of being a student or a Padawan. And by deferring to and learning from someone that we admire or respect, or who is even literally our teacher or master, it puts the ego in its place. Because a true Padawan and master relationship lifts both individuals to a higher level. An authentic student does not seek to outshine or outmaneuver their teacher, but rather to actually emulate their example and teachings. They know that they can best serve the team and the coach by being an example and a role model through their own performance. And so the desire shifts, and this is crucial, from a personal gratification to an act of service or love for their teacher and their team. It becomes selfless, and immediately the ego takes a backseat. And on the flip side, the best coaches know that the greatest joy comes not from winning, but from watching their players win. So it becomes this positive reinforcing cycle where the coach and the player each feed off of the other's success. And if you actually look at them, Star Wars shows, the Star Wars movie, right? Anakin Skywalker's desire to prove himself and actually be labeled as a master is one of the primary undermining character traits that causes his fall to the dark side. Now, this other side of the coin, right? This other side of the ego, this is that imposter syndrome, which is also directly challenged by taking on this Padawan mindset. Because imposter syndrome, at its core, is this idea that I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. And we can even trick ourselves into thinking that this is humility and a good thing. But it's not humility. Humility is about being teachable, selfless, and diligent. It's not this idea of I'm not worthy to do X. That whole concept is selfish. It's all centered on the self. And it's just as self-centered as the obnoxious hold my beer. Frankly, who the hell do you think you are to deprive the world of your gifts, talent, and effort, right? People don't need some expert, they need help. And if you're even one step ahead on the path, or if you have a service to offer, then you're in a position to work and to serve. However, since imposter syndrome occurs mostly internally, it's just not as expressed as often. And so it kind of flies under the radar. So we don't really think of it as an ego problem, but it has that same acidic, poisonous effect, just slowly eating away at our insides and our character. I know this actually because, frankly, I struggle with it quite a bit. Actually, I struggle with both of these quite a bit, more than I care to admit anyway. But again, by voluntarily looking for a master or a teacher to study under, we check this back into place. We are no longer acting of our own accord in the Padawan mindset, but rather following the direction and understudy of our teacher, right? We're doing our work and contributing to society at large. It's no longer about us, but the responsibility to serve and to lift everyone else around us, and eventually to become masters of our craft and then pass that education on to other people, right? So back to the story. Honestly, I don't remember exactly where the switch happened, but I remember getting home and I had a roommate by the name of Jeff. Super cool dude. Jeff was a rookie, but a very good one. Like Damon, things had just clicked for Jeff sooner than they had for me. And he was a great person for me to chase and to compete with. And long story short, Jeff was a couple of years younger than me. I had actually just graduated college and was holding on to some pride and was kind of reluctant to take on any advice from anyone that wasn't really Chandler, even though Jeff was clearly outperforming my current level. So I thought to myself, what have I got to lose? Jeff's crushing it. And I actually remember Jeff had a killer day that day. I think he had brought home like 8 or 9 sales to my 2. And so that contrast just kind of really shook me up and kind of was a wake-up call. And so I was just like, hey, Jeff, tell me, what the heck are you doing? This was, I'll be honest, the first time that I was determined to learn from him and really pick his brain. Unfortunately for me, he was willing to share his full pitch and his process, and he even let me record him. And when I watched Jeff do his pitch and go through his process, number one, I recognized all of the things that Chandler had been teaching me, and that Chandler was still absolutely right. So it reinforced everything I had already learned. But there was also a couple of things there that were unique to Jeff's personality. And he was almost over the top about his enthusiasm and his excitement to talk to customers about pest control. I'll admit, I thought it was silly, but I thought to myself, you know what? It's working for the guy, and I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens. So I rededicated myself to those basics with that slight tweak of adding in Jeff's enthusiasm and full-scale commitment to maximizing all of the features and the benefits of our service. So I rehearsed and practiced with Jeff for the rest of the night, and we get up the next morning, go to the morning meeting, and we head out to the doors. And as I'm going out, I'm just focused on being like Jeff. That was my entire focus, just to do everything in my power to get my mind off the fact that I was in this competition with Damon. And after talking to Chandler, he also threw me in some fresh hood, helped me give me a fresh view, clean slate, so to speak, and then popped an energy drink. So I was hyped up and ready to go. And that day started off really quick. Right away, I found somebody who clearly needed the service, but was doubtful that what we would do would work. But my enthusiasm and modeling of Jeff actually carried me through that. And the customer recognized it, and they took me at face value and decided to buy. And that first win turned into huge momentum, setting the tone for the day. And I noticed that throughout the day, I would start to deviate and kind of drift a little bit from the initial game plan with Jeff. I remember losing a couple of sales because of this. So I would go back and re-watch that recording of Jeff and just bring myself back to base. Now, long story short, I ended up busting my butt throughout the whole day, and I came home with 8 sales. What ended up being my personal best for sales in a day that season. And Damon also had a much better day. He finished off with 6 of his own on that day. So in total, I had 10 and he had 9. 8 of mine got serviced while 6 of his got serviced. And so it did come down to the wire, but I was able to pull it off. And more importantly, I had actually learned this incredible lesson that's become one of the mainstays in my arsenal for overcoming pressure in every situation. Again, pressure, the need to perform, it's a real thing. We can't dismiss it. Even if we were to try, there's going to be other people who try to put their expectations on us, and that's going to add even more pressure. And regardless of where those expectations or attachments come from, our ego is going to have an immediate reaction. And while there are a lot of tools in Batman's belt to help beat the pressure in the ego, the one that I've constantly used as often as Batman's grappling gun is this concept of becoming a student or a Padawan. Because again, it almost always eliminates both ego sides, right? That reaction of needing to prove something or feel like you're not even good enough to try. And more importantly, it actually brings out my best and my most authentic self, because then I've got nothing to prove. I'm actually eager to go to work and to make a difference. And that's what overcoming pressure is all about, performing at your highest level. And if you like content like this, please feel free to check this out.